How's it going, everyone? I'm going to try and break down this time-lapse video of me creating this sci-fi battle axe because I thought it was quite interesting if you're into hard surface modeling and stuff like that. And I'm going to break it into two parts. So this one is going to be all of the modeling and the sub-D process that I usually go for, and then the second video is going to be more about materials and the extra details. So if you're interested in how I modeled this is the video for you. If you're only interested in the materials, then come back later on when I post part 2. But so to start with, I usually like to block out the model. So use some cylinders for the handle, and then the top part is a little bit tricky because of the way it's constructed. And if you want to download this reference, I got it off Pinterest, so I'll leave the link in my description. You can follow along. But what I usually do is get a plane and then just move the edges so it kind of aligns. And we don't need anything to be perfect at this stage. We just kind of want the model to be relatively close because it makes everything easier, and we want it to be clean topology because when we get into the sub-D process, it will make everything a lot nicer to work with. So all of this stuff is just modeling out the different sections, and for some people, you might want to model the entire head of this axe with one plane, but because they're all like knife edges and they all kind of come off at different lengths from the reference, I decided to do all three of them as a different plane because obviously you can't see the actual width of this battle axe, so you have to kind of judge it off your eye. But I can imagine that the side and top knives are going to be inset in the main body, so I wanted to separate them so I had more control over the scale of everything, and then if it came to it I could shrink wrap or just push the models together or join them. So just getting all of that stuff sorted. So then after we've got the main shape, I came in and started dealing with the sharp edges, because obviously you want the body to still be thick, but you want the edge to be thin. So what I usually do is grab the edge and scale them down, or put in an inset and scale that up and down. But for this main body axe, it seemed from the picture to only be the first edge that was actually sharp. So instead of insetting, I just grabbed the edge and scaled it together with another loop cut, and then beveled the inside to match the reference picture. But for this bevel, it was a little bit too shallow, so what I did instead is just add some loop cuts in and then join the geometry so I could actually move the edges instead of the bevel, and maybe come in with the bevel later on. And obviously we're not trying to subdivide anything yet because we're going to have to add a lot more loop cuts and subdivision for it to look good. So we're still just modeling out the actual sharp edges because it will make it easier later on to crease everything, etc. And then I was having a little bit of difficulty with this side piece here, and mostly because one, I definitely just made it too wide to begin with, and two, I haven't really worked with sharp edges before. Like, I've seen tutorials and bits and pieces, but I've never actually had to deal with edges of this scale before, so it was kind of a work in progress, but we made it through. So What I did was just merge all of the vertices to make this triangle on the back end, and then inset the triangle so we had something to work with to scale down to make that edge. And then obviously my topology was a little bit messed up here, so I just had to delete a few edges and merge some vertices, but we got there in the end and we managed to get an actual rim around this knife. And then obviously come in with your alt click, grab the edges and then bring them down. But obviously it didn't look good, so rule of thumb really, if you're going for a sharp edge, just grab the top edge of what you're doing and then bring that down to make the point. Otherwise it just looks a bit weird. And then I grabbed the inset face and just scaled it up a little bit to give a bit more depth to the actual knife edge. And I did basically the same thing for all of the other sharp edges in this model. And the topology is still shocking on this back end, but you know, this isn't for a client, it's just a bit of fun. So I was kind of taking it easy, but obviously if you're working for a client or something, you want to make sure that topology is on point, because it can. So now that we got all the sharp edges out of the way, I just decided to add some basic materials into this. I don't know about you guys, but I find it a lot easier to see kind of what I'm working with materials on it, because the wireframe and material view can only get you so far. So adding some colors in definitely helps see the finished product a little bit better, and it kind of shows you where your topology is going wrong. If you're, say for example, on one of these knife edges, I left in an accidental edge or something, it might make the shading a little bit odd. So it's good to get the colors in early just so you can see if there's any warping, etc. So now I had to make these little triangles on this back end, and it was a little bit difficult because of the way I had scaled this, but I basically bootlegged it and just I joined the vertices together and then bridge the faces to create that that triangle shape. Obviously not the best, but I mean it works for this example. And then I loop cut the inside and scaled it in because it wasn't a cut all the way through. Obviously there's red in there, so getting those faces in and then changing the color to red came out with a pretty good good picture there. And then that's basically all of the modeling done for this, and now it's just a case of getting ready to subdivide. So I'm adding in a lot of creases and bits and pieces here just to make the edges that need to be sharp in the subdivide. But obviously you can see from the reference image that this entire thing is very smooth metal, so we want to make sure that subdivision is on, or otherwise the shading will come out a little bit weird because there are no creases in this metal. It's all supposed to be one piece, but obviously we're making it in separate pieces, so we need to be super careful with the subdivisions and make sure we keep the sharp and then everything else subdivided properly. So going in here, basically just doing the normal bits and pieces of marking the edges we want to keep sharp, and it's kind of up to your taste, I suppose, but just make sure you have the main edges sharp. And you can always, like I have here, add some more loop cuts in if you need the point to be a little bit more curved. But for this example piece, a lot of it is just straight lines and quads. So it's basically just the outline that we need to keep sharp. This middle section here on the body was a little bit interesting because on the reference image, it is obviously joined to the handle, but it is slightly curved. So when I was creasing this, I didn't know whether to leave it uncreased or crease some of it, but I personally thought it looked better creased in this moment, but we did change it a little bit later on to make the handle fit properly into the body of the axe. And as you're subdividing, you want to make sure you have enough loop cuts, because the way that subdivision works just splits the cubes. So you want to make sure that everything has enough faces to work with. And here you can see me just adding a slight bevel to the sides and the top of this axe, just to make it a little bit more organic, because in real life, no metal surface is 100% sharp. So everything, even if it's tiny, has a bevel. So you want to make sure that any sharp edges have a slight bevel to them when you're modeling, especially if you're modeling for a more realistic effect like I do. But if this is going to be a game asset or something like that, you don't really have to worry about it that much, because obviously you want to keep the poly count as low as possible for performance. So it's really up to your personal preference. And then the same thing I did with the bottom of this axe, I'm doing with the side, adding these triangles in and bridging them. And then this one came out a little bit curved. So all you have to do is go in and crease the inside loops there, which makes it quite easy. And then obviously I filled it again. And I was looking at this model and I really did have some issues with the handle. So first I brought the bottom end in and made it look like it was actually connected by adding an inset and then extruding. Easy, simple stuff really. And then obviously I did the same for the top part as well. So here, I'm just looking at where I want the circle to be placed. So I just added some bevels first to give that edge a little bit more of a dynamics, and then started shrink wrapping. So now the two faces are together, and then apply the shrink wrap, and then now we come in and we just create the circle with loop tools and extrude it out and inset it. So I'll slow this bit down just so you can see, but basically what I'm doing is I'm selecting the inner circle and then basically placing the 3D cursor directly in the center, and then applying the origin to the 3D cursor, so everything is perfectly in line. If you're trying to do this with your eyes, it's always going to come out a little bit wonky. So just making sure that you're attaching the absolute centers to each other just makes everything more cohesive and symmetrical. So just doing that here as well. I mean, you could argue there's a case for doing it for every part of this axe, but obviously the top part doesn't matter too much, but the handle especially needs to be aligned. And then that's kind of the modeling finished. So I hope you've learned something. Let me know what you think about this type of video. If you want me to slow it down or do a live version but slower, maybe like an hour-long video of me just going through every step, let me know. But obviously the second part with the material and texturing and details will be coming up very soon. So I hope you enjoyed. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.